Hey Brian, how you doing today?
Hey, it's been a good day, and it's I don't even know where to start with
I
our
don't,
our latest guest.
I don't even know what day of the week it is anymore. Half the time I wake up and like the other day I thought it was already Friday, but it was only Tuesday.
Oh dear,
Um,
that's a
so-
big miss.
but well, I mean it's a big miss. But do the days even really matter anymore at this point? We're recording this, on May 22nd, 2020, right now. If anyone's listening to that, that's where my comment comes from. That, but we had a great guest today, Paul Powers of Physna.
And I'll put emphasis on Powers. I think he's appropriately named because I think that's an apt descriptor of the way this man thinks. He's
You know,
the CEO and co-founder, and this is just one of the companies that he's steered in his young life because he's still a youthful guy.
and we talked about data in 3D world, all the way down to leadership. So I think it's going to be a great episode for our listeners to kick back and listen to. With that, I don't want to hold them up from having to listen.
All right, great. Let's go, Nick. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Lead.exe. I'm Brian Comerford in Denver, Colorado.
And I'm Nick Lozano in Washington, D.C.
And we're thrilled to have Paul Powers as our special guest today. He is the CEO and co-founder of Physna. Paul, welcome to our program. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I've got to ask you a little bit about your background to start with, because as I was doing some research and exploring a little bit about who you are, I found myself feeling suddenly incredibly inadequate in pretty much every way.
No, what you felt was that you're very focused, probably. My life is the definition of ADD, I think.
I don't know. Brian was a DJ before and owned a nightclub,
okay.
so.
Well, you have a very unique background. Let's put it that way. You seem to be a bit of a brainiac just looking at it on paper, but certainly you've got a trajectory for your career path that is incredibly impressive. I can't say that I can think of anyone else in the roster of folks that I've spoken to, and I've spoken to a lot, who have actually ranked in the Forbes 30 under 30. So tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got an accolade of that sort, if you would, please.
Sure, thank you. So how far back do you want me to go? You want me to go back to the moment of birth, or recent? I don't know. Where do you want me to start?
Well, I thought it was interesting that you graduated high school at a pretty young age and got yourself into an international university program. So that might be an interesting place to start.
Okay, I'll start in the post-puberty years then. So growing up, I was homeschooled from a really early age, and that's a long story as well why that happened. But I'll skip through that because my life's complicated enough without going into more detail and anything I don't need to. So the cool thing about being homeschooled is that you get to really, especially when you're very nerdy, and another word, you could say self-motivated, but nerdy is another word for that. And you really like reading the stuff that your parents can leave you alone, and after a while, you get away with not having to read things that you don't want to read because they're not going to test you on that. They're going to take a standard test that everyone in the country takes, essentially, who's homeschooled, and they test you on things like math and reading comprehension and stuff, but they don't ask you, to give any individuals, from history, personal biography or anything. So I got to basically skip almost every English literature book, almost every American history, all the things that at that age I wasn't very interested in. Although I'm a big history buff, I am actually very fascinated by it. But at the time, I was just all in, and I still am, all in on like the math and sciences. So I got really, really focused there, and it was cool because I had a lot of flexibility from a scheduling standpoint. I got to spend my free time engaging with individuals, who were teaching these classes at school or whatnot. So I was able to go to take a single. I wasn't going to college at this point, but I got to take a single course in chemistry when I was 12, which was really cool because I felt like it was like an adult. I said, "I'm not messing around." So that was kind of neat. And then by the time I was 16, I got, I already, from a standardized testing perspective, I was fine. But to this day, you could say I haven't graduated high school from the perspective of I have a very bad understanding of American history, and there are a lot of books I haven't read. So I guess you could look at it two ways. But I was at 16. I went to Harvard and I studied astronomy and astrophysics. And then I decided that it was like my first time away from home, and I thought, hey, this is cool. So I wanted to get out further. Went over to Switzerland for an exchange year. Got a scholarship to go there, and thought it would be fun. I thought I just thought German would be a cool language to learn, and I have a little bit of Swiss ancestry in me anyway, and I thought that'd be kind of neat to just go see the Alps. And I found out that Swiss German is extremely different than regular German, but I kind of had to learn it twice. But learned the language over there, and then I was also kind of at that age going through this period where I was like, I don't know if I should really stay in the sciences or if I should go into business. And the reason was that, background this time, we started seeing, people like Mark Zuckerberg. We saw Elon Musk, maybe not quite yet, but Steve Jobs and certainly Bill Gates have been for a while really been the ones that were changing the world. And the people who I've grown up watching on the History Channel, and that still has history on it, like Albert Einstein and Isaac Newton. It seems I kind of came to a realization at some point that, in the past you used to be able to change the world by having a whiteboard or a blackboard and writing down everything. And nowadays it felt like, to me at the time, especially after I started studying sciences, I realized you have to have a grant for everything. You can't just go, research. You have to have money behind you. You have to have a team behind you. And business interests and political interests and other interests are the ones that drive that. So I thought maybe it's more important that I try to just lead a team than trying to actually be the individual contributor. So I decided to, it was a tough decision, but I thought, okay, maybe I should go into either business or law. I thought that, at the age of 16, I started my first company, and I always had this feeling that, business is a lot of, at least like the basics of business, doesn't really require an MBA. There's certainly a lot you can learn from getting an MBA, but I didn't necessarily feel like it was a necessary thing to start your company. So especially for a really technical company, that's a little bit different than what you learn in MBA school. So I thought, okay, I want to get a degree, though I don't want to just drop out. So I got into the University of Heidelberg over in Germany. Which is kind of like their own little Harvard. It's a really old school. It was actually this university over there, and which is neat because it was founded in I think 1386. Wow. They actually have like a student jail still from back when. So that was really cool. And they were talking about that there's still pictures and drawings and stuff about people were still dueling, and they're like, oh, don't you remember the times when we only spoke Latin in the university? It's fascinating you can almost go back into medieval times there. Anyway, so I studied law, and at the time I had heard, and I don't know if this is true, but I was told like a few times, like, hey, if you actually pass the bar over here, you'll be the first guy to, you'll be the first American to come over here, learn the language, and then pass our bar. And I thought, well, that'd be kind of cool. Maybe I'll have some kind of advantage. And so I did that, and realized after I did it why nobody else had done it before. It was really, really, really hard. If you want to talk about the world's most difficult, useless degree, it's going over to another country, learning their language, and then taking their bar exam and coming back and not taking it. Right? So very useless degree. But I never wanted to be a lawyer, so that made it okay. I thought law is a useful degree to have if you want to go into business. It helps you with negotiations. It helps you with deductive reasoning. It helps you with research. You learn a lot of skills from it, and it's also it's a pretty tough program. So I thought if I'm going to go into anything, law is a good thing to go to, and you also meet a lot of people by being in law. You get a lot of connections, which thought that if maybe that would be helpful. That was the thinking. So I went over there, and I had run companies this entire time because I don't come from a wealthy family or anything, so I had to pay for it. Luckily, university in Germany was free, but I still had to stay alive. I had to have some sort of money. So I always had a company ever since I was 16. I've always had one another company, and they've always been in the technical area. They've always been like technical companies. So the first company I started was a tutoring company, but very quickly that morphed into like an automated system, where it was people were doing like remote tutoring, and you would set up your own account and all that other fun stuff. So everything turned pretty technical pretty quickly, and but I always felt like I wanted to do something bigger. My life goal was I want to leave a big footprint and point in the right direction for humanity. I think the biggest asset we have in life is time, and the biggest privilege we have is people who came before us who just left these amazing contributions that we get to live off of. People, there are a number of people in history who stand out. Not just Einstein and Newton, but people back there like Galileo and Aristotle, and more recent people like Tesla and others who have really just made some unbelievable advancements that have kind of helped humanity leapfrog forward in technology a lot faster than the current pace at any given time. And I thought, those people really are the ones that I looked up to. I thought it'd be so cool to do that, and I felt more of a moral obligation to it than anything, because I felt like, man, I'm so lucky that I'm not dying of some plague right now. I'm not starving to death. I've never had to hunt to survive. All these things are great, and I have those luxuries because people who came before me and advanced science and technology forward. So I thought I want to do something bigger than these little companies that I was doing during law school, and so I put a lot of thought into what actually set time aside to really, really focus on what I wanted to do. And one day, finally figured it out. I thought, hey, look, one of the biggest problems that we had, and my focus in law was IP law, intellectual property. Because if you're a really geeky, nerdy guy, and you're in law, that's where you go, is intellectual property law, because that's like
For
a
sure.
science law, right? So,
Yeah.
so that was my focal point, and it's funny because when you're in that field, you do it actually. You are familiar with algorithms because you use them all the time. You use them for plagiarism detection, for detecting when people are stealing each other's logos and all the other fun stuff. But we can never prevent the theft of a patent, right? That was the problem. It was always reactionary. It was always reactive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Someone stole my patent. This is patent infringement, and now we're going to sue them. And it's a multi-million-dollar suit, and it's going to take forever, and everyone loses. And if you look at the macroeconomic effect of patent infringement, it's, first of all, start with the economics of it. It's about $10 trillion a year worldwide is lost. Everyone has a different estimate, but that seems to be the consensus, is that around now we've got about $10 trillion in annual loss globally to patent infringement and IP theft. And in addition to that, it also has a really terrible side effect, which is that if you don't have intellectual property, you don't have as much research and development, because at the end of the day, you're not going to invest in R&D if somebody else can just wait there patiently for you to be finished inventing something. And then all the money that they didn't spend on research and development, they're now going to spend on marketing, and they're going to steal your idea and be successful with it, right? So it's kind of a race to the bottom. It's like, okay, who can make stuff the cheapest with the least amount of innovation? And that's not a good direction for humanity to go. So I thought it'd be really good if we could actually, create a little bit of order here. And so after realizing we couldn't really find these 3D models people were using to design physical parts, I thought, okay, there's got to be something out there that does. And anyway, I was kind of really focused on this point. I realized that this was a big deal, and also was thinking about it from a macro technical perspective, which is, hey, there's these stages of humanity, and I really like some of the people I like to read are like Ray Kurzweil, for example. They have these, whether or not you believe all their prognosis is irrelevant, but they're just fascinating because they have these really macro, long-term views of where technology will eventually lead us. And after a while, you start to think about it in terms of where we are along this continuum. And at some point, we have to get to a point where physical and digital are not totally different things anymore, right? Where they start to merge. And so I really view this as a really cool thing to focus on. I moved back to the US, and I found my co-founder. His name is Glenn Warner. He unfortunately passed away last year. But I met up with him, and we started this company. And well, we started this idea. It wasn't even a company yet. And we tried like everything on the market, because we did find things that said geometric shape search or whatever. We thought, that looks good. And none of it worked. It was terrible. It was awful. It was never going to work at all. Every file type would mess it up. Something was with a different orientation would mess it up.
And failure drives success, right?
Well, we're talking about, but we couldn't modify the software. This is other people's software. So we're like, okay, well, I can't use that to create this tool. We didn't really set out to create a fundamental technology from the beginning. It was just let's try to solve this use case. But when we realized that nothing could solve it, we thought, okay, then we have to choose between either giving up on this idea. But I moved back from Germany, so I don't know if I really want to do that, or really go after this and not just solve it for the sake of this use case, but solve this problem in a more macro sense where we do break down these issues that are, I mean, we figured out why none of these programs were able to actually do what we were hoping they would, and searching between models in a way that was file agnostic and that really does break down those borders between physical and digital by saying, hey, this thing is related to this part in this way, even though it's not a duplicate of it, right? And I can see how this part is inside of that part or how this can merge together. And nothing would do that. So we decided we have to actually create our own technology. And actually was some of the stuff that we used in astrophysics that inspired me to come up with an idea anyway that led to us working on some algorithms together. It took years, but eventually we got it to work. And we talked to people about it in industry. We showed them demos and said, look, I can tell you that these two things are different or they're similar or they're related or that they're inside of each other. And they said, well, why on earth are you trying to go solve intellectual property problems? Because we have major issues with things we already have, like we have issues in engineering, we have issues in procurement, we have issues in less than 1/10 of our employees who should be exposed to 3D models are because it's too complicated to work with them. People don't utilize the data that they have in 3D to identify supplier alternatives. They don't. The engineers in the physical world, it's like mechanical engineers, they are only 1/5 as productive as software engineers because they don't have simple tools like search, copy paste, auto like spell check. They don't have the equivalent of that in 3D. So there are a lot of big issues to solve. And so we decided, okay, let's create a version of the software that solves kind of everything, or not everything, but a lot of those core use cases in a very direct way. And then let's turn this into a platform so that people can actually, let's make this a core technology that other people can use with APIs so that other use cases that we heard about, like in healthcare, where there's a suspicion that you could use business technology, which is proprietary, but they could maybe lease that from us or they use that from us to find tumors at a much earlier stage than you can with two-dimensional artificial intelligence, because with third-dimensional, you've got a lot more data. And so there are a lot of use cases that we've been exploring. We've been really blessed with the company. It's gone really well. We've been able to attract some really great investors and some really great talent. And I'm super excited about it. We've got a couple of press releases that'll be coming out here in the next month or two. That'll be making some pretty big announcements about what we're doing. So it'll be easier to talk about what some of those big accomplishments are. So anyone who listens to it before July is just going to have to trust me on it or just wait. But we're making a couple of really cool announcements, and I'm really excited about where we're going. And so that was my ridiculously long answer to your very short question.
No, that's great. It's a mouthful, but there were two things that came out of that, and one my clarification to only two. One
of the thing for every 10 minutes I talk. That's great.
Yeah. Well, this is going to be a 5-hour podcast, so buckle up. So, my comments about failure breeds success, the point being that as you observe what was in the marketplace, no one else had really solved the problem that was the critical problem that you were looking at, that you were trying to solve. And that in turn, from what you were saying, sounds to me like it ended up ultimately laying the foundation for you making the decision that you had to develop something independently. Is that accurate?
Totally, yeah. The best things that ever happened to me have been failures, honestly. I know that's cliche, but that's very true. Because I think sometimes when things don't work out the way that you want them to, you have to reassess. I don't want to say where you're going, but how you're going there, and maybe if you might be able to get to a bigger goal. I mean, I like to think goal first, but sometimes you realize there's a bigger goal behind that goal that you could actually aim for. And by realizing that the path that you're on is not going to get you to that smaller goal, you can realize, hey, wait a minute, now I'm on a highway, and this will take me to a much bigger goal than I was thinking of when I was on the dirt road, right? So I think that sometimes these successes, they really do breed, failures, they really do breed success.
And that, part of what I heard, particularly in your TED Talk, was related particularly to, how much focus is given to those things that are not those bigger goals, right? There's a lot of wasted effort that is being directed onto things that are these smaller areas of fulfillment, when ultimately all of us could be, on a trajectory, kind of as you're describing for your own personal path, where we're driving towards those things that that they may be harder. They may take, greater collective effort, to achieve them. But ultimately, they can be achieved in just as short a time as some of these other smaller objectives. It's just maybe people aren't thinking big enough about what those goals should be.
Well, I think the problem with the TED Talk was first of all that I was mentioning, but also that one of the things that we discovered while working on Pysna is that a lot of people on the mechanical side or on the 3D side, or the physical side, I should say, of innovation, they have a much harder time innovating than people realize. And so these tools that are missing are making it so much harder to innovate than it needs to be. And it's kind of like, it's a good reason. Let's put it this way. Less than 1% of software has the ability to deal with three-dimensional data that has to do with products, right? So everything in the world is three-dimensional. Even an atom is three-dimensional. Everything is three-dimensional. And less than 1% of software can actually analyze 3D data. Over 70% of our economy is in physical goods, physical products, real things, right? Not just digital things. And actually, most of the digital products that we have relate to physical things. So you can actually say it's a much larger percentage of our economy. But let's just be gracious and say it's less than, way less than 30% of our economy is actually digital. And by the way, that's not like a transition that's going to happen. It's not like digital is going to become bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. The reality is that digital is big because it helps us with the physical, right? Zoom or Google Hangouts, they're digital products, but they're facilitating a physical interaction. Mm-hmm. And the same is true for almost any app that you can think about. And there's a natural limit to how far you can go before you actually have to reach back into the physical world. So the vast majority of our economy, and every economy in the world, is physical. And all of that is untapped, considering that software, which is where the innovation's happening, almost none of it deals with it. So if we could apply software to the physical world, right, you would have this tremendous explosion of economic value, but also in innovation, right? Because in software you can innovate very quickly, right? I mean, there are people at our company who could build a pretty cool program for you overnight if they had to, and you could never develop a physical product that fast. Because you have to design it, then make it. You have to figure out who's going to supply the parts. You have to figure out how do you even start to design something. What software? You have to use software. You can't just draw something on a napkin. People don't know how to make that. So there's a really big learning curve to even know how to begin to invent something. And then even if you did invent it, okay, so you spend years learning how to design something, and it's really complicated 3D software, like CAD software, and then what? What are you going to do? Unless you have a very simple product, you can't put it in a 3D printer. I mean, that's a great advancement, by the way, because you can make simple products. But what if you design a mechanical watch? Then you're going to need other parts, and you're going to need them to be assembled, and you're going to need a lot of different types of parts that come from a lot of different types of manufacturing processes. So, you might spend 2 weeks designing a mechanical watch, spend 2 years sourcing the suppliers of it. So it's slow and hard to innovate in the real world. And that's kind of a really big frustration that I've got, because at the end of the day, even though I am a big proponent of physical and digital merging, the slowdown of physical technology, real world technology, impacts and impedes our ability to advance in software. Think about it. At the end of the day, the cloud is physical, right? Everyone talks about cloud technology. The cloud is a series of physical boxes, right? These are actual servers that just aren't at your location. That you're connected to them via the internet, but they're not. It's not literally a cloud. It's a physical thing.
Wait,
so
what?
Our cloud becomes more powerful and our hardware becomes more powerful, right? When we have hardware advancements, we have software advancements. And so at some point we get to this limitation. So there's a limitation there. And that's really what I was expressing about from a larger perspective. It's not just that individuals aren't setting large enough goals. It's that even if you do set a large goal, it's in a large area of our economy, the vast majority of our economy, it's been impossible or very, very, very hard to make the advancements that you can do. But a lot of people have, and so I talked about the idea of a flying car. I feel like everybody in the universe, everybody on Earth has either thought of a flying car, seen a flying car in a movie, or heard of the concept of a flying car, right? This is nothing that I invented, but nobody around us is flying around in cars. And okay, there are a couple of prototypes out there for sure, but seriously, there's no actual flying car that people would go out and buy today and actually, legally fly around, right? So, and the reason for that is because even though everybody has this idea, and I'm sure a great number of people have been actually very motivated to say, I'm going to make the first flying car. It's really, really, really hard because it's not just one idea. It's many, many, many ideas that are all physical that have to go together into making that idea a reality. And it's so slow and so complicated and so expensive and difficult to innovate in the real world with machinery that cars are pretty much the same as they were 10, 20 years ago. The big advancement outside of the battery side is another area, but if you're sitting in a car, it's almost the same as it was 20 years ago. The big difference is really the technology in the car. The software is what's big, the big change in your car, not so much the engine. You still use rubber wheels. You still have a steering wheel that you use to direct yourself around traffic, but you have a screen in front of you. And in the case of like a Tesla, it'll automate, it'll drive itself, right? So software is making amazing advancements. Just imagine what the world would look like if hardware could keep up. Sorry, I'm on another rampage there. Sorry. I'm just drinking coffee. That's my problem.
I'll bet it's not just the coffee.
No, it's you're right. It's a very terrible case of ADD, I'm sure.
Well, so, you seem to be thinking a lot more thoughts than probably the average person does per minute. So, which, I imagine at times makes it challenging for your mouth to actually keep up with where your brain is.
I'll take that as a compliment. I think although some people do say that at certain points I sound like an auctioneer. I kind of ramble kind of fast. So, but if you watch the TED Talk and how slowly I was talking, I was very deliberate there. Very deliberate. The one thing I thought the entire time was just don't talk at your normal speed. Slow down.
Well, you executed that well. It was it was clear it was deliberate.
I really enjoyed it. And you brought up the whole point and what you said about the car, but you brought the thing about the mobile phone, right? It's the glass rectangle. And I had never thought about that till you said that. I was like, well, when I think back when I got my first iPhone in 2008, it really hasn't iterated that much since then. It's still a rectangle with a battery. It still does pretty much everything that it did the first day it came out. And where's the iteration on that? And some of that, I guess you brought up great points about it being, it's hard to, test rapid develop in the physical world because you have to actually go out and machine the product and then get an assembly line together and everything. So I think it's all great points that you brought up, and it got me really thinking when I listened to that.
Well, I'm glad. And your phone has changed, but it's been in software that it's changed the most. There have been physical changes, but tiny, insignificant physical changes. And just imagine if every time you had an idea I'm pretty convinced that everybody is a natural inventor. The biggest assets humans have is our creativity, right? No matter how smart you are, no matter how good you are at math, no matter how fast you think or slow or whatever, you'll never catch up to a computer because that's something that computers do extremely well is quick, simple, pre-programmed reasoning. But creativity is something that is very hard to duplicate in a computer environment. And so what makes humans really unique, and also from the animal kingdom's perspective, right? What makes us stand out is that we're inventive. And the fact that we're not utilizing that is upsetting. But imagine what the world would look like if you could have anything you could think of, right? If you could develop anything you could think of. And even though I'm frustrated that we haven't been there in the past, we are heading in that direction. And our software is a very small. Well, I don't know how small or large it is, but it's a component to get there, right? But there are other components as well. 3D printing is a small step. I have a 3D printer. It's slow. I mean, and it builds things in plastic. It's not exactly like in Star Trek where it makes anything instantly like you'd like, but it's a small step in the right direction. We are heading though pretty quickly in the direction where you'll be able to innovate as fast as you can think, innovate at the speed of your imagination. But that's really what I think is a big critical thing. And we're very close to that in the digital world, right? In the if you're a coder, you can have an idea for a program you want to build, and maybe it's not as fast as you can think of it, but you can, overnight or within a reasonable period of time, you can code up some at least simple version of that. In the physical world, we're nowhere near that point yet. But when we get there, it's going to be really amazing. I'm really excited about that, and I think I think this is a very moral issue, because the fact that we can't innovate, and there's still people who are performing very manual tasks, and a lot of people will swear they've never invented anything. I don't believe them. I'm pretty sure that everybody, like, I can't remember the last thing I thought of that is a physical invention. But that doesn't mean they've never thought about something that would be useful to have. I'm pretty sure that every human being has at some point in their life had an idea for an invention, but they've very, 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 very few have executed on it. And so that's kind of the point that I was trying to make there. And I think the world's going to be a much cooler place in the next 30 years than it was in the last 30.
So how do you, oh no, sorry, go ahead, Brian.
Go ahead, Nick.
So how do you foster that creativity and make that, that action happen? Like, what do you like to do when you come up with an idea? Obviously you came up with this idea to taking the 3D model. So what's your thought process behind that? Because like you said, a lot of people have ideas. A lot of people are like what they call an idea guy, right? They come up with an idea, but it's very difficult to be the person who actually executes that. So how do you like to go from the idea to the execution? Is there like some process you like to go through, or like, do you just kind of find an idea you like to do and then roll with it and try to make it happen?
No, I probably roll with one out of every million ideas. I mean, you can't roll with every idea. That's what's frustrating, right? Is that just like everybody else, I'm sure I have way more ideas than I can actually execute on. You can't execute on every idea you have. It would be impossible. I'm not building 5 different companies, 100 different companies right now. I'm building one, right? I'm building Pysna, and that's it. And I have no intention of going on to the next thing anytime soon. This is my obsession. This is what I want to focus on as long as I possibly can, and take as far as I can take it. But I do have other ideas. What I do is I typically write them down somewhere, and I leave them. The ideas I have typically end up being business ideas, because that's the area that I'm in. But and I write those down. Physical ideas, like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if I had this, some kind of like scooter that would just fly around? Or wouldn't it be cool if I had a shovel that would go shovel the driveway for me, and I wouldn't have to go out right now when it's cold? That would be like those kind of ideas. I don't do anything on them, right? I don't even write them down. I'm just like, yeah, that's just unrealistic, right? Is the way that I chalk up my mind, and so I don't do anything with them. And that's what's frustrating, is because some people do. Some people go out and go out and actually start making progress there. But with physical ideas like that, with real world inventions, not just software programs, it's expensive. It's hard, and it's impossible to figure out how to get started if you don't already know how to use CAD software. And these tools are expensive. These tools are not intuitive. They're very difficult to use. And like I said, in the best case scenario, when you're done, you have a 3D model of it. We're getting to a place, though, where technology is making it simpler. So my biggest idea in life is to enable other people to execute on their ideas more easily. So if you do have an idea for a shovel that's shovels the snow for you, you can go about designing that without having to first figure out how to use a program for 3 years of college or 4 years of college, right? And also figure out after that, how do I go about manufacturing this part? How do I go about putting this thing together without having to have a bunch of friends in supply chain and a bunch of connections to all the different companies you would need to put that thing together, and then also having the right tools at your house to connect it. What we're trying to do at Physna is simplify that by making it, what we do is we take these models, we take the data, and we codify them. So we basically say, this is a codified representation of this thing in the real world. And what that allows us to do is, if you're not an engineer, we can show you the 3D model, but then we can show you the analysis of it, and we can make predictions about it. So if you don't know what you're looking at a complicated little piece, we can tell you, well, this is what this is what it's for, this is what it should be made out of, and this is who should make it. If you have an idea, and let's say you have designed it, you have a mechanical watch, let's say, what we do then is we say, okay, we have like a product that I'm not going to announce here because it's not in the press release yet, but it kind of takes the universe of 3D models, right? It's kind of like a Google for 3D. And what that'll do is, if you upload your mechanical watch into this platform, then it'll say, okay, this is your watch. These are the parts inside. Even if you haven't labeled them or separated them, it'll say, these are all the parts that have to go into your watch. And these are all the places that supply those parts. Or here are all the places that can manufacture those parts. And so all you have to do is say, okay, cool, that's great. And so it does all the heavy lifting for you. And the idea is, and that's, by the way, that's useful for professionals, obviously, because it takes a lot of their time. It lets them focus on more important matters. It saves them time, saves them money. But it's also, that's the enterprise version. But but it's really intended to eventually get us to a point where anybody can go through the entire process of not just having the idea, but executing it and actually having that thing in your hand at the end of the day.
That's really cool. It's almost like the open software approach, right? Where I don't have to know how to make all these libraries that somebody else spent time doing. If I want to, grab something that makes a webhook call, I have something to build off of.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's really cool when you think about it that way. Because when you're talking about making a watch, I think I go back to being, a kid and buying a VCR and taking it apart just because I wanted to see how it worked. And it's like plugging it in, pulling off the thing, watching how things move, and slowly, one by one, trying to figure out what it was doing, reverse engineering it, I guess, basically. And what you're explaining, I just made me feel like a kid again. It's like, oh, and it'd be so cool to just, take a picture of something and say, this is that gear, and you can buy it from, this supplier in China or India. I mean, it's just really awesome.
I
Yeah,
actually
it's
like
tech
what you
guys.
said.
We love our libraries.
I like what you said about making you feel like a kid again, because it's funny. Most people, when they think about the last time they had an idea for a physical invention, they were a kid. Kids have a lot of ideas for physical inventions. The reason that adults don't is because we're jaded, right? I don't think about things like this as much anymore. Even though I work in this field of enabling other people, I'm sure that even if we had the ability to do everything that I just talked about, I probably wouldn't be the most prolific inventor of things at all. I would probably be one of the least prolific inventor of physical things. And I'm sure that my little nephew or niece, they would be, much more prolific in inventing all kinds of stuff. I don't know if they'd be good inventions or not, but they'd be much more prolific about it because they're not jaded, because they haven't ever tried and failed before or ever had to realize, oh wait, that's actually really complicated. That's really hard to do. It's always been hard to do, by the way. I'm not saying this is a recent thing. It's just a lot of people have had ideas for physical things for a really long time, and it's always been very hard to build those things. It's not new. It's just we've realized that it's possible with software to do what you said. To take different components in open environment and stick them together and say, there we go, that's a new invention, right? I only have to innovate so much to get this whole thing already out the door. We're working on getting there from a physical perspective too. It won't be much longer, but I think the next few years it's going to be very transformative, not just because of Physna, but because of overall other trends that are happening in the economy. Let's put 3D printing to the side. There's this other trend which includes 3D printing, but it's more macro, which is advanced manufacturing in general, which I think is really the next step. Not so much that, eventually I'm sure everyone will have some kind of device in their house that makes things magically. At some point in the future, sure. Right now, in the near future, the foreseeable future, I think what's going to happen is you're probably going to have fulfillment centers, and then very, very close to you. And if you ask for something, you won't have to go on to Amazon.com and look for a thing and hope that you find something that is similar to what you have in your mind, right? Because when you go on Amazon to buy something, you have an idea what you want. You already know what you're looking for, unless you're just browsing for the heck of it.
That's dangerous, by the way.
That is dangerous. Yeah, they do a really good job of that.
Yeah,
you go there for one thing and you buy something totally unrelated. But if you know what you're looking for, you go in there and you search and you spend a lot of time looking. And the reason you buy other stuff, I guess, is because you were frustrated trying to find what you came there for to begin with. And in the future, what I think will happen is you'll have an idea for something. You won't have to bother looking for if that exact same thing is available already. You'll just say, okay, this is what I want, and you'll either design it, you describe it, you do something like that, and a nearby fulfillment center will manufacture that part on demand, right? With multiple complex, expensive machines, which is why I think that's going to happen before you do it at home. And this is already happening, by the way. There are already networks of fulfillment centers that do this on a little bit larger scale. But I think eventually we'll get down to the consumer level. Well, you'll have an idea for something, and you won't have to actually 3D design it. You'll just explain it, or maybe you'll describe it. The computer will design it for you, or maybe you'll design it, but it'll be like putting Lego blocks together. It won't be very complicated. And from there, the fulfillment will be automated, and you'll have it at your house. And that's really what I think is going to happen in the next 10 years. Is we'll see that we go from a consumer economy to an inventor plus consumer economy, essentially.
So that sounds to me like, the magic of AI starting to play a role in some of that, and some of what you had touched on earlier, just in terms of describing the challenges and the uniquenesses around human creativity. It made me think of a book by Ray Kurzweil called "How to Create a Mind: The Secret of
Hmm.
Human Thought Revealed." And
Yeah.
certainly as we're nearing that singularity, right? As we're nearing that merging of the physical and digital that he's so famous for describing in the singularity. I'm curious, with what you're doing, how does that start to correlate with changes and evolutions that are going to be required with things like AI?
So that's a great question. So what we're doing is a step that has to happen to get to what you would call singularity, right? And everyone has a slightly different definition of it. But I really do think that like 100% merger of physical and digital is pretty much the definition of singularity, right? And most people can agree that when if you really do merge the two, where you can't really differentiate, or it doesn't matter, then you have singularity. So to do that, the first thing that has to happen is software has to understand the world around it, right? And it doesn't. It inherently does not, and there is a reason for that. It doesn't understand it because software is a two-dimensional line of thought. Software works in 2D. It's code, right? It's looking at data, and humans operate really well in a 2D environment. We simplify things now. So if you go online to buy a fridge or a phone or whatever, you're going to create text, which is two-dimensional, to describe what you're thinking about. Or you'll take a picture, which also happens to be two-dimensional, and you'll put that in there and try to search that way. You will naturally. It's easy for a computer to process in 2D. It's just a lot less data. As soon as you get into 3D, now you're in a really complex area of for your computer. And a really good analogy would be, think about the difference between a telegram and the internet, right? Everything on the internet versus a telegram, right? Or like Morse code, right? Morse code is a pretty good example of single dimensional, right? Dot, 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 whatever. That is all one line. That's not even two-dimensional. It's one-dimensional data, right? Two-dimensional data is everything that we're doing right now. Everything that's going on right here with between us talking in totally different parts of the country. All the technology, all the ability to communicate like this is the quantum leap between dot 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 dot, which someone might understand, but most of us won't, to a binary two-dimensional system. It's a huge leap in technology. So imagine, if you will, if you were to multiply, if you look at the difference between Morse code and modern technology, modern software, and you multiply modern software by that same multiplier, right, another dimension, you get into insane areas of technology, areas that are actually, honestly, hard to verbalize. They're hard to describe, and they're hard to even really imagine, because it's not human nature to think in exponential terms. We're as biological creatures, we like to think linearly, right? So we think, oh yeah, I'll have a better car in 2 years. Well, in reality, technology doesn't move like that. Technology does and should move exponentially. So people think, oh, in the next 30 years we'll innovate like we did in the last 30. No, ideally, within the next 10 we'll innovate like we did in the last 30, and then the next year after that we'll innovate like we did in the last 30. So it should be an exponential growth. And so to get where we need to be, we have to get 2D to understand 3D. What we do in Physna is we have those proprietary algorithms that break things down into a code that's it's very complicated how it works. It's a series of algorithms, though, and it turns everything into code regardless of the file format, etc. And then that basically creates something very similar to DNA. This is why we use the analogy of DNA. So physical DNA is where Physna comes from. And that allows us to understand every single thing that can be expressed about that three-dimensional model. And just like DNA, right? DNA also can be expressed in 2D, right? It's a T, G, A, etc., right? Or C, G, A, T. Yeah, those are the four letters. So you can. So those four letters in whatever sequence can represent DNA. Very similarly, Physna can express everything in non-biological form, or biological, doesn't really matter, three-dimensional form, in two-dimensional text. So the cool thing about making that leap is that now we can bridge that gap by having software understand how to influence the physical world and how physical things relate. That gap is a really big gap, because to bridge. And the great thing about having bridged it is that when we've actually run a lot of tests on machine learning. So we have machine learning in our product. And what's amazing about it is, and I'm not trying to brag here, I'm excited more about the core technology here than anything, is that by having bridged that, the machine learning, we didn't know this what exactly would happen, but we found that it's between 10,000 and, depending on what data you're working with, between 10,000 and 100,000 times more powerful, more accurate, faster, I should say, at learning than any other input that we've tried. So in other words, a good way of thinking about this would be if I wanted to know your name, let's say, this is a bad example, but let's just stick with it because I'm already in for a penny for gold. So I want to guess your name with a picture, right? Let's say I need 500,000 pictures of you to do that. I don't know why. Let's just roll with it. But you need 500,000 pictures to do with that. And if that's the ratio of pictures we would need 5 3D models of you to guess your name, right? So moving on to a more realistic example, if I want to predict how well something will perform, how much something is going to cost, how something should be manufactured, how something should be made, or back to another use case I kind of touched on earlier, which this isn't something that we actively work on, but I know is theoretically possible. If there's something wrong with you physically, if you might have an early stage tumor or something like that, it's a significant jump because you have so much more data in 3D than you do in 2D. A good analogy would be if I knew everything about every cell in your body versus if I had a picture of you. I know it's infinite, almost. It's just a ridiculous exponential growth of data. So when you have that growth in data, machine learning can be a lot more powerful. And one of the cool things about what we're doing is the machine learning that we have. Machine learning is kind of standardized. That's not standardized. They're very, very different processes you can use. But we're using like the industry's best standards of machine learning, but we haven't like created our own type of machine learning from the ether or whatever, right? Where you can apply the same machine learning principles and they'll just work that much better because it's deductive reasoning. It can guess that a lot faster. The reason that I can guess your name in maybe 5 tries versus 500,000 tries is because if I have 3D, maybe I can look in your wallet, right? So we have more data to work with. It's easier to make guesses. So wow. I don't know if that helps, but that's one of the things we're trying to help with. And so to really get us towards singularity, that's the first step that has to happen. And I think the next step is the reverse, right? So what we're doing right now is, what we've done right now, I guess I should say, is we've taken 3D and we've explained it in 2D. Now what we need to do, and we're actively working on this actually, is going in the opposite direction, saying, okay, now go from 2D and go into 3D. A good example of that would be, look, I really want a mechanical watch that has this logo on it that I like, and I want it to be a really good watch. I want it to work just like a Rolex, the same tickiness as a Rolex, whatever. You use your own colloquial description of it, and then there you go. There's your 3-dimensional watch, right? That's actually not a big leap at a conceptual level, because if we can describe a watch like that, if you give me a 3D model and we can give you that output, this is a 3D model of a watch that has this logo on it and it has this script, blah, 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 blah. It's not that difficult to then go in the up. I mean, it's not easy. Obviously, it's going to take but it's not very hard to imagine why you can go in the opposite direction. That's why I was saying I don't think you actually have to design things at some point. I think at some point you'll just describe what you want and it'll be done.
That's fascinating. And it sounds hugely complex. So a problem that I'm glad we've got a brain like yours that's working on solving it, to be honest.
Well, my brain doesn't know how to code. So if it was my brain working on this, you guys would be waiting for an infinite period of time. We've got some really smart people on the team who actually turned this rambling ADD guy's thoughts into something that actually does something useful.
No, that's perfect. That's a perfect segue into the next question that I had for you, because this is a program about leadership and technology, right? We're not just tech nerds. We're also leadership nerds. So for everything that you've described, there has to be a great team behind you. And I heard you state it in your intro that at some point you recognized that there was a need, you were going to have to evolve beyond being just a contributor, and that ultimately you were really going to have to build the team in order to start taking these things. From a leadership perspective, with the level of complexity that you've described to us, what have been some of your biggest challenges in determining how you would assemble a team like that? Now that you're operational, what are some of the biggest challenges that you find that you're running into?
The biggest challenge in running a company like this is, or any company really, is you make your point. you can't get into the weeds too much, even though I sound like I'm really in the weeds right now. If you were to pull up our code in front of me and say, hey, what's going on here? I'd be like, I have no idea what that is. It looks like Chinese algebra. So like, stay out of the weeds is an important part. But the hard thing to do is to hire the right people to do that when you're not going to spend the time to actually review every line of code that they write, which you can't. I mean, I'm not really technically illiterate, but like, but I certainly don't have the time or the energy or the interest to spend all that time going over God knows how many lines of code. And you can't, because I wouldn't be able to do everything else that I have to do. So the hardest thing is to find somebody who's technically competent and competent in other areas too. My goal as CEO of this company is to eventually become the dumbest person in this company. That is my absolute goal, and I mean that wholeheartedly. I want to become the most useless person in this company eventually. Now, let me caveat that. I don't want to become increasingly stupid or increasingly useless, but what I want to do is hire people who are so much better than me that eventually I am the weakest link in the company. Like that is your goal as CEO, is up level the company, and of course I want to scale with it, right? I want to. That's a moving target, But I want, or it should be. So, but I want to hire people who are much better salespeople than I am. I want to hire people who are much better marketers, much better technical developers and technical leaders than I am. So and that's honestly at some point that becomes your main job, right, is to make sure that you're in the best brains in every role and that everybody sees the vision so that they act as a cohesive unit and not as individuals with separate motives. So the biggest thing in leadership, I feel, is goal alignment. Getting people excited about what you're doing is the most important thing you can do. And well, it's probably tied with the other most important thing you can do, with maybe the second most important thing you can do, which is find people who honestly have the same goal, who believe in what you're doing and have talents that you don't, and acknowledging that you don't have, that you don't want to be more talented than them. I think a lot of people limit themselves as leaders because they feel challenged by people who are better than them in one area or another. When you start a company as CEO, the E stands for everything office, everything, right? I'm chief everything officer. I do everything because I just started this company, right? It's really easy to become CEO. Start an LLC, you're a CEO, all right? They're like, oh, it's so hard to become that. No, it's the easiest job in the world to get. You can do it for $15. It's really easy to become a CEO. Having people who actually work for you, is a little bit different. And so, but at the beginning, you're chief everything officer. And so you have to always be willing to let go and delegate. And that's a hard thing to do because because you're very passionate. You've got this thing it means everything to you, right? I mean, like eventually, if it doesn't, then you're doing the wrong thing. I mean, if you don't obsess about what you're doing, then you should stop doing it. You have this thing that becomes your baby. Like if someone were to talk down about Physna, I don't know if the right word would be that I'd be parental about it, or that I would almost feel personally offended by it, because I almost, like, my identity becomes the same as the company. So
sure.
It feels like that. So trusting people to do something when you're already in the middle of it, and especially when they're new and you're like, you don't understand what I'm talking about, you don't understand what's going on. Especially it's a complicated product. Like, how the hell are you going to do a better job than I'll do? Because I've been working on this for years and you just heard about it and you barely were able to recite it back to me. So I'm not going to trust you to go out there and do this. So it's hard to let go, but you have to go through that process, find really good people, and find people who are self-motivated so that you don't have to spend too much time explaining things over and over again to them or directing them. If they're really motivated about the same thing you are, they have goal alignment, and that's it's far more powerful to have a great team around you than just to do everything on your own. At some point, you can't scale your time. Your time is the most valuable asset that you have. It's more valuable than money. It's the great equalizer in life. We all have the same number of hours in a day. No matter how rich you are, you can't buy more of it. So using your time right is very important.
That's great. Thank you. One other thing that I think would be interesting to get your perspective on is, with what we've gone through with the recent pandemic, we're not over it yet, right? I mean, obviously there's still a lot of places in lockdown as of when our recording date here, but there is going to be a significant transformation for every type of industry, every type of business, every type of human to human interaction. What are some of the challenges that you foresee, and how does a company like Physna play a role in how it can help with some of the transformation that needs to take place?
Well, I mean, there's a lot that has to change. the frustrating thing about humans, except for all the other things I've expressed frustration about, is that we are really bad students of history, and things keep repeating. This is not the first time we've had a pandemic. This we're lucky that this isn't the Black Death. We'd all be dead by now. I mean, it's we weren't prepared to handle a pandemic, even though we've been through it many times as a species, and we have it in written records. It's not like we have forgotten about these pandemics. So we weren't really doing anything to prepare for it I mean, we were, but not to a sufficient extent. And now that we see that it can happen, people are having, it's a wake up call. And people are like, oh, yeah, we actually do need to be kind of careful about this stuff. So there'll be some changes for sure. The long term ones are ultimately, I think, going to be, unless technology is a facilitator of changes that lead unintended consequences. Humans, because we're such terrible students of history, my less optimistic prognosis says eventually people are going to go back to doing everything the exact same way they were before. It won't look the same because in the future the technology is going to be different. We won't all be shaking hands, maybe because we'll all be in some kind of spacesuit. But we will be. Our natural tendencies are going to go back to what they always were. And the shorter term, economically, what the impacts are. We're definitely seeing with a lot of companies that they have they're putting people on furlough and they have asset freezes and stuff. I don't want to say lucky because I don't want to try and make a good thing out of a pandemic. It's killing people. But in the case of Physna, what we found is that we've been less unfortunate in some ways because a lot of companies, I mean that purely and only from an economic standpoint, and that other companies have realized areas where they need to improve and where we can help them, right? So one of the things that a lot of companies have realized is, hey, having stuff stored on 20 different physical services in 20 different parts of the country is not very good when no one can go to work. They've also realized, hey, if I only order this part from this one vendor and they aren't able to deliver for some reason, or deliveries are postponed for some reason, what do I do if my factory shuts down at $2 million a day in loss, right? So what we've been able to do is we've actually had an increase in interest. I can't say again, I won't say that it's a good thing because it obviously affects everybody in a very negative way. It's a sad thing, but from a pure sales lead perspective, lead generation has gone up, inbound because people have realized that, hey, we have a lot of inefficiencies, especially on the supply chain side. And they've realized that, one of the things that we're able to do at Pysna is say, hey, look, okay, I know that you like ordering bolt A1, B2 from this one supplier over in this one city. And it turns out, dude, that part is actually the exact same thing as these other 57 parts that you've got. And you're ordering those from the same person, but they're 57 different people. So actually, you could save a lot of money if you just order everything from one. But you have 58 options who you can order that from. And you're shutting down your line for $2 million a day because you're waiting on this guy when you have 57 people over here who are happy to deliver that part to you. And you just don't realize it's the same part because it is a part number. But geometrically and in every way, shape, and form, this is the exact same thing. And that sounds like a really stupid situation. That's the case in most, actually, I'll be willing to say, that's the case in every company I've spoken to. Every company I've spoken to has that problem at some extent, and sometimes it's minor being maybe 5% of their data is finds self-evident duplicates. Most of them are are significant. And there are some I've talked to who have between 30 and 100, on average, between 30 and 100 duplicates for every single part. And you can imagine how problematic that is, not just because 30 to 100 people designed the same thing over and over and over again, and they went through approval and all this other stuff for the same thing. It's also frustrating because they're ordering that many parts from that many different vendors, not knowing they're identical. And then when they need a spare, they're ordering it, even though they've got 99 spare parts in the closet, they're totally fine. They don't realize it. So this is one example of the inefficiencies that we have that have been kind of brought to light by a cog in the wheel going off, because of COVID-19. So it's helped us from a lead perspective, but from a global perspective, from an economic perspective, I think that we're going to see actually a lot more of that. People are going to start to optimize and think, okay, how can I become more efficient and less reliant on the physical presence of people all the time? Which is a good question to ask because I think that we rely on people we rely on people for physical tasks that I don't believe at all, by the way, that when you use robots for manufacturing, that you're necessarily replacing people's jobs in the long, and maybe temporarily, but not long term. No human being should ever have to do anything that's repetitive and that can be automated. If you can be automated, you need to take a very deep look at yourself and say, why am I doing this job? Because you have a lot more to offer. And technology doesn't take jobs. If you look back at history, before the pandemic, we had some of the lowest unemployment in history. But at the same time, we just made all the blacksmiths totally obsolete because we don't have horseshoes anymore, right? So no one rides horses anymore. So the car is supposed to, that didn't knock out any jobs, right? We just shift in where we apply people, and it becomes more and more high value, the output that people give. They're still farmers, but they're not using handheld tools. They're using large mechanical devices to rake in, to harvest the crops at the speed of 100 individuals. And eventually those will be self-driving. But that means that farmer can do something more creative with their time. So I think it's actually going to push things in the right direction from a macroeconomic standpoint. From a humanity standpoint, I think that it's a disaster that we probably should have been preparing for more than we did. And I think that some people are being a little bit irrational on both sides of the table. One thing that concerns me is that some people are going out and acting like just because the government's reopening, that everything's fine again. But it's like if you need proof that people, as I mentioned earlier in this, one of my other 7 or so long-winded, ADD rambles. You need proof that people think in linear terms, not that don't understand. Like we understand maybe conceptually, but we don't naturally think in terms of exponential growth. Everybody was talking about flattening the curve of COVID, and now everyone's declaring victory, and everyone's going out and they're kissing their neighbors or whatever they're doing, but they're not wearing masks anywhere. You hear all the traffic behind me right now, right? I mean, it's crazy. Everyone acts like, oh yeah, yesterday that we signed a deal with the virus is now, and now it's gone. It left, and we sent them an eviction notice. No, that's not how it works. What happened is we flattened it from exponential growth to linear growth. So if you look at the chart, instead of being a hockey stick, it's a straight line. But it's more dangerous right now to go out than it was in March or April when you wouldn't go out just for any reason, right? But for some reason, with twice as many cases as back then, everyone thinks, oh, it's gone. Because we've been looking at an exponential curve this whole time, so it looks flat. But it's not flat. It's actually going up. It's just the good news is it's not a hockey stick. So anyway, you asked me for an opinion on something, and that's where you went wrong because I gave you.
All good stuff.
We love informed opinions, and,
exactly.
and you certainly have one. So thank you for all those responses.
So as we're closing down on our time, there's one question I always like to ask all of our guests is there a book that has had a big influence on your impact, or a piece of media or something that you like to give or share with everybody?
Yeah, a lot of it has. I mean, we talked a little bit about Ray Kurzweil, and there are many. I mean, that's not like what I read every day. There's a lot of things. Sorry, I'll bring this to a close.
Sure, no worries. No, take all the time you need.
I'm pretty sure most people, they think, okay, Paul's advice was why say one word when 20 will suffice. Anyway, the one book that I think is really, really valuable and is not probably on most people's top 10 business must-read lists, but I think is probably one of the most important books I've read in the past few years, is a book called The Happiness Advantage. And I can't remember the author's name off the top of my head, but if you look it up, you'll find it. It's a pretty common, it's a pretty well-known book. And what I really like about it is that it takes a very scientific approach to how people think and the reward systems that we have. And one of the biggest things that I like to focus on when I read, and typically I read through like Audible books when I'm driving, but what I like to focus on are the more macro picture things than the macro picture, because I really believe that if you have the right mindset and you have the right mental energy, you will teach yourself everything else. You will, if you're energized and you're excited and you must achieve something in life, you'll easily learn all the strategies and tools and tips and all that fun stuff. Learning all the strategies and tools and tips and whatnot before you have your mind in the right place, though, or without keeping your mind in the right place, is totally useless, because if you won't get off the couch, why does any of that matter? So I think The Happiness Advantage is a really good book because it really highlights something that's really not intuitive, which is that we have one that we typically think in terms of, I have to get to this point to become happy. And that starts a cycle, right, where you're not happy because you haven't achieved something yet, and therefore, but because that lack of happiness makes you less creative, less energetic, and less enthusiastic, you basically have less fuel to burn. You set lower and lower and lower and lower goals, and you're sadder and sadder and sadder and sadder. But you can stop that by just saying, like, I'm gonna be happy because it's a fuel, and you'll start hitting goals, and those will inevitably help to fuel your happiness, but you don't become dependent on them. And it's a really interesting book. It has a lot of studies. It has a lot of really valuable objective data. So I would highly recommend that you read
I'll have to check it out. It sounds kind of similar to that Delivering Happiness that
that.
Tony Hsieh from was it Zappos kind of wrote something similar to that. But this sounds like a very interesting read. I'm gonna have to add that one onto my queue.
Just did. No, that's great. Well, Paul Powers, I'll tell you what, having you on the show is, a podcast's greatest boon. You are, you're a mouthful, my friend.
Not much work on our end.
Yeah, that's right.
Next time you can just say you can just put up your Zoom background can just be a question, and then you can just go for an hour and then come back, and I'll still be going. So yeah.
No, it's great. It is interesting getting some insight into the way that you think, and you're thinking about very complex things. And I think the way that you present is very reflective of that. So it's been a real pleasure having you on the program and getting some of your insights. I think we probably got about 3 or 4 podcasts worth out of this one program.
So Paul, if people
the transcript version, yeah.
Well, thankfully we've got AI to help us with that. So it'll be easy peasy.
So Paul, if people are looking for you or Physna, where can they find you?
LinkedIn's a really effective way. Just go to looking up Paul Powers. It's pretty easy to spell, but Physna is Physna. Physna for physical DNA, if that helps. But there's no D, so Physna. And if you look me up, I'm happy to talk to people who are interested. Sure.
Perfect. We'll be sure to post all your relative links to your LinkedIn and your website in the show notes so that everyone can find it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much for taking
really
the time out of your schedule to join us today.
No worries. Thank you for taking time out of a Friday evening before a holiday weekend to talk to me. That's a big honor. I know that time is precious. So
Well, it's been time well spent. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Yeah.